The elevator was supposed to be empty at 3 in the morning. Victoria Sterling had made sure of that, keying in her private access code, choosing the dead hours when even the most ambitious employees had surrendered to sleep. She needed silence, needed the kind of profound quiet that only came in the belly of a 60-story tower when the city below finally exhaled. But as the polished steel doors slid open on the 42nd floor, she heard something that made her blood turn to ice. A man's voice, soft and low, humming a melody she hadn't heard in 23 years. The same gentle tune her father used to sing when nightmares chased her from sleep, when the cancer was eating him alive and he still found strength to chase away her demons with nothing but his voice and a song older than memory itself. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand froze on the elevator button. Her breath caught in her throat like a trapped bird. The humming continued, achingly familiar, impossibly present, drifting from somewhere deeper in the darkened offices. Her father was dead, had been dead since she was 12. So why was someone singing his lullaby in her building at 3 in the morning? If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The Sterling Industries headquarters occupied an entire city block, its glass and steel frame piercing the Seattle skyline like a gleaming needle. Victoria had designed it herself, every angle calculated for maximum intimidation, every surface polished to mirror-like perfection. At 35, she commanded a tech empire worth $14 billion, her voice capable of moving markets with a single word, her signature closing deals that reshaped entire industries. Tonight, she wore what her assistant called her armor, a charcoal Armani suit that cost more than most people's cars, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a chignon so severe it made her Arctic blue eyes appear even more penetrating. She'd built herself into a fortress of success, impenetrable and untouchable, the woman who never let anyone close enough to hurt her. But the humming was unraveling 23 years of carefully constructed walls. She followed the sound through corridors lined with awards and accolades, past conference rooms where she'd crushed competitors and sealed her reputation as the most ruthless CEO in tech. Her Louboutin heels clicked against Italian marble, each step echoing in the supernatural quiet. The melody grew stronger, more distinct, leading her toward the research and development wing where her most sensitive projects lived behind biometric locks and bulletproof glass. The voice belonged to a man. That much was clear now. Warm and careful, with the kind of gentleness that spoke of practice, of love worn smooth by repetition. Victoria's chest tightened with each note. Memories, surfacing like bodies from a grave she'd thought permanently sealed. She rounded the corner and stopped dead. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Laboratory 7, she could see a figure silhouetted against the pale glow of emergency lighting. A man in gray coveralls, his back to her, cradling something small against his chest. The humming was coming from him, that impossible heart-stopping melody that belonged to her father, to her childhood, to a world where people sang instead of screamed. As her eyes adjusted, the scene came into focus with crystalline clarity. The man was holding a child, a boy, maybe 4 years old, with dark curls that caught the light like spun silk. The child's small body was slack with sleep, his face peaceful against the man's shoulder. Around them, the laboratory looked different than it did during business hours, softer somehow. A blanket spread on the floor, a small backpack sitting open beside a thermos, and what looked like a picture book. The man was Marcus Chen, she realized with a jolt that felt like stepping into an ice bath. The night janitor she'd hired 6 months ago after the previous cleaning service had proven inadequate. 32 years old, according to his file, former aerospace engineer before budget cuts had eliminated his position at Boeing. Single father. Emergency contact, David Chen, age 4. But his file had said nothing about the way he moved. Careful and protective, like he was carrying the entire world in his arms. Nothing about the tenderness in his voice as he sang that impossible song. Nothing about how he could reach across 2 decades and crack open her chest with 8 bars of melody. Marcus turned, probably sensing her presence, and their eyes met through the glass. For a moment that stretched like eternity, neither of them moved. Victoria saw the exact second recognition flickered in his dark brown eyes. Not just that she was his boss, but that she was the woman whose name appeared on every paycheck, whose reputation preceded her like a storm front. She watched him straighten, watched the easy intimacy of the moment shatter as professional awareness crashed over him. But it was too late. She'd seen him. Really seen him. Seen the way he held his son like the boy was made of starlight and wishes. Seen the careful nest he'd made in her sterile laboratory, transforming corporate coldness into something that looked dangerously close to home. And he'd seen her too, Victoria Sterling at her most vulnerable, standing in a darkened hallway with tears streaming down her face because a stranger was singing her father's song to a sleeping child. Marcus shifted the boy in his arms and moved toward the door, his expression apologetic, explanatory words already forming on his lips. But Victoria held up a trembling hand to stop him. She couldn't hear excuses right now, couldn't process the rational explanations for why he was here, why his son was here, why the universe had chosen this moment to resurrect ghosts she'd spent decades burying. Instead, she turned and fled. Her heels echoed through empty corridors as she half ran toward the executive elevator, Marcus's lullaby chasing her like smoke. By the time she reached her penthouse office, her perfectly controlled composure had cracked completely. She collapsed into her leather desk chair, hands shaking as she loosened the silk scarf at her throat. The song was still there, still playing in her head with devastating clarity. Sleep now, little starlight. Tomorrow's a new day. Dream of all the wonders waiting just beyond the way. Her father's voice, clear as if he were sitting beside her. Thomas Sterling, the brilliant software programmer who'd built the foundation of what would become her empire before leukemia stole him away. The man who'd sung that lullaby when storms rattled their tiny apartment windows, when medical bills piled higher than hope, when her mother worked double shifts and he was all she had against the dark. Victoria opened her laptop with trembling fingers and pulled up Marcus Chen's employee file. The photograph showed a serious-faced man with kind eyes, but it captured nothing of what she'd witnessed tonight. Nothing of the father who turned laboratory space into sanctuary, who sang lullabies like prayers, who somehow knew the most important song from her childhood. Where had he learned it? How was it possible that a melody she'd never heard outside her father's voice could emerge from a stranger's throat with such perfect pitch, such achingly familiar cadence? Her secure line buzzed, the phone that only her most trusted associates knew about. Victoria glanced at the caller ID and felt her stomach drop. James Morrison, her head of security, the man who monitored every inch of this building 24 hours a day. "We have a situation." James's voice was crisp, professional. "I've been reviewing tonight's security footage from the R&D wing. There's been a breach of protocol." Victoria closed her eyes. "What kind of breach?" "The night custodian brought an unauthorized person into the building, a minor. They're currently in Laboratory 7, which requires Level 4 clearance. I can have security remove them immediately and terminate his employment by morning." "No." The word escaped before Victoria could stop it. Silence stretched across the line. James Morrison had worked for her for 8 years. She'd never countermanded a security recommendation before, never shown mercy when protocols were violated. In the tech industry, one compromised system could mean billions in stolen intellectual property. "Ma'am, I'll handle it personally," Victoria said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Have security stand down until further notice." "Ms. Sterling, with respect, this is exactly the kind of situation that—" "I said I'll handle it, James." She ended the call before he could argue further, then sat back in her chair, staring at the city lights spreading. Below, like a circuit board. 42 stories down, people lived and loved and sang lullabies to their children. But up here, in her tower of glass and ambition, Victoria had forgotten what any of that felt like. Until tonight. Until a man named Marcus Chen had cracked open her carefully constructed world with 8 bars of melody and shown her what she'd been missing. The question was, what did she do now? Victoria picked up her private phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. Dr. Sarah Hendricks answered on the second ring, despite the late hour. Psychiatrists who specialized in trauma therapy were accustomed to crisis calls. "Sarah, it's Victoria. I need to see you. Something's happened." Are you safe? Do you need me to come to you? Victoria laughed, but it came out broken. I'm safe, but I think I might be losing my mind. Through her office windows, she could see the lights of Laboratory 7 still glowing softly in the distance. Somewhere down there, Marcus Chen was probably explaining to his son why they had to leave, gathering their makeshift camp, apologizing for the intrusion. But Victoria didn't want them to leave. For the first time in 23 years, she wanted something that couldn't be bought or conquered or programmed into existence. She wanted to know why a stranger's lullaby sounded like coming home. The melody lingered in her office long after she'd finally convinced herself to go home, following her into sleep where it wove through dreams of a sick man's gentle voice and the promise that tomorrow would always be a new day. When Victoria woke 6 hours later, she realized two things with startling clarity. First, she was going to find out everything about Marcus Chen, no matter how deep she had to dig. And second, her life had just divided into two distinct periods, before the lullaby and everything that would come after. Victoria Sterling had built her empire on information. Every acquisition, every hostile takeover, every strategic partnership began with knowing her target better than they knew themselves. But as she sat in her penthouse office the next morning, staring at Marcus Chen's employee file spread across her mahogany desk, she realized how little data could tell you about a human being. The facts were sparse, clinical. Marcus David Chen, age 32. Born in Portland, Oregon. MIT graduate with dual degrees in aerospace engineering and applied mathematics. Hired by Boeing directly out of college. Worked on satellite guidance systems for 7 years before the defense contract cuts of 2021 eliminated his entire department. Unemployed for 8 months before taking the custodial position at Sterling Industries. Single father to David Thomas Chen, age 4. Mother not listed on any documentation. What the file didn't capture was the way Marcus had held his son like he was cradling the entire universe. The careful nest he'd created in Laboratory 7. The lullaby that had reached through 23 years of carefully constructed armor and found the scared 12-year-old girl, Victoria, thought she'd buried forever. Her assistant knocked on the door, 2 sharp raps that meant urgent business. Come in, Helen. Helen Park entered with the efficient grace that had made her indispensable for the past 5 years. At 28, she possessed the rare ability to anticipate Victoria's needs before Victoria herself recognized them. Today, she carried a tablet and wore the expression that meant she'd been digging through databases all night. You asked me to research Marcus Chen, Helen said, settling into the chair across from Victoria's desk. I found some interesting information that wasn't in his employment file. Victoria leaned forward. Tell me. His full name is Marcus David Chen Sterling. He legally changed it back to just Chen when he was 18. Helen paused, watching Victoria's face carefully. His mother's maiden name was Sterling, Jennifer Sterling. She died when he was 14. The name hit Victoria like a physical blow. Jennifer Sterling, her father's younger sister, the aunt she'd never met because of some family rift that happened before Victoria was born. Her father had mentioned Jenny exactly once when Victoria was 8 and asking why they never visited other family members. She made her choice, Thomas had said, his voice heavy with grief. Sometimes people decide that pride matters more than love. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee cup. What else? Jennifer Sterling had a relationship with David Chen, a music teacher from Portland. Never married, but they lived together for several years. According to the records I could find, she worked as a nurse until she developed ovarian cancer. She died in 2006. And Marcus's father? Helen's expression softened. David Chen died in a car accident when Marcus was 16. After that, he was essentially on his own. Worked his way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, no other family listed anywhere. Victoria set down her cup with careful precision. Marcus wasn't just a stranger who happened to know her father's lullaby. He was family. Her cousin, the son of the sister her father had lost, to whatever pride or stubbornness had fractured their relationship decades ago. There's more, Helen continued. I found David Chen's obituary. He was a music teacher at Lincoln High School, known for working with underprivileged kids. According to several articles, he specialized in lullabies and folk songs from different cultures. He believed that music could heal trauma in children. Of course, David Chen had taught Marcus the lullaby, the same song that Thomas Sterling had sung to his daughter, probably learned from their own father or grandmother, passed down through generations like a precious heirloom made of melody and memory. Victoria stood and walked to the wood floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Seattle. Somewhere in the city, her cousin, the family she'd never known she had, was probably explaining to his 4-year-old son why Daddy had to find a new job. Because that's what would happen now, wasn't it? James Morrison had already drafted termination paperwork. Security protocols had been violated. There was no place in her carefully ordered world for custodians who turned laboratories into bedrooms and sang lullabies in the dark. "Helen," Victoria said without turning around, "I need you to do something else for me." "Of course. Find out everything you can about Marcus's son, David, medical records, school information, anything that might explain why they were in the building at 3 in the morning. I'll need authorization to access medical files. Whatever it takes." Victoria's reflection in the window showed a woman she barely recognized, vulnerable, uncertain, nothing like the ruthless CEO who'd built this empire through sheer force of will. And Helen? This conversation never happened. After Helen left, Victoria tried to focus on work. Board meetings, quarterly projections, the hostile takeover of a smaller competitor that would expand their market share by 15%. But every few minutes, her mind drifted back to Laboratory 7 and the image of Marcus Chen creating sanctuary in her sterile corporate world. At noon, she made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew her. She took the elevator down to the 42nd floor. Laboratory 7 looked different in daylight, harsh fluorescent lighting exposing every sterile surface, every piece of equipment designed to push the boundaries of human knowledge. There was no trace of the makeshift camp Victoria had witnessed the night before. No blanket, no backpack, no evidence that two people had ever found comfort in this place. Marcus was there, though. She could see him through the glass walls, methodically cleaning workstations with the same careful attention he'd shown while holding his sleeping son. He wore the same gray coveralls as before, but something about his posture had changed. The easy grace was gone, replaced by the rigid efficiency of someone trying to become invisible. Victoria swiped her keycard and entered the lab. Marcus looked up, startled, then immediately straightened to attention. "Miss Sterling, I wasn't expecting, I should have finished this section already. I can come back later if—" "Stop!" Victoria's voice was gentler than she'd intended. "You're not in trouble." Marcus's dark eyes searched her face, clearly not believing her. "Ma'am, about last night. I know I violated building security. There's no excuse for bringing David here, but I couldn't afford overnight childcare, and the babysitter I usually use had a family emergency. I understand if you need to terminate my employment." "Where is he now? Your son?" "At daycare. They open at 7, so I drop him off before my shift ends." Marcus's hands clutched the spray bottle he'd been using, knuckles white with tension. "It won't happen again. I'll find other arrangements." Victoria moved closer, studying his face in the unforgiving laboratory light. The resemblance to her father was subtle but unmistakable, something in the shape of his jaw, the way his eyebrows drew together when he was worried. Family features passed down through generations like genetic echoes. "The lullaby," she said. "Where did you learn it?" Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "My father taught it to me. He was a music teacher, collected songs from all over. He said that one was special, something about how it had been in our family for generations." "Your father was David Chen?" "Yes." Marcus's expression grew cautious. "How did you—" "Your mother was Jennifer Sterling, my father's sister." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Victoria watched the knowledge hit Marcus, saw the exact moment he understood that his boss wasn't just a stranger, but family he'd never known existed. "That's impossible," he whispered. "My mother never mentioned. She said she didn't have any family left." "My father said the same thing about her." Victoria's throat felt tight. "I think they fought about something before I was born. I never knew what. Marcus set down the spray bottle with trembling hands. "You're my cousin." "I'm your cousin." They stared at each other across 23 years of separation, two people who should have known each other, who should have shared holidays and birthday parties and the complicated intimacy of family. Instead, they were strangers, connected only by a lullaby and the stubborn pride of their parents. "David," Victoria said, "your son, is there a reason you couldn't leave him at home last night?" Marcus's face shuddered immediately. "It's not your concern. I'm asking as family, not as your employer." The word family seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. He leaned against the lab bench, suddenly looking exhausted. "He has night terrors, started about 6 months ago after we had to move apartments. He wakes up screaming, completely inconsolable unless I'm there to sing to him. The lullaby. It's the only thing that works. I've tried everything, doctors, therapists, medication, but when the nightmares come, only that song can bring him back." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "The babysitter I usually use quit last week, said she couldn't handle it anymore, and the daycare doesn't offer overnight services." Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the rigid control she'd maintained for decades. "So you brought him here." "I know it was wrong, but he feels safe with me, and I thought if I could just get through a few more shifts until I found another solution." Marcus looked directly at her then, and Victoria saw her father's eyes staring back. "He's all I have, Miss Sterling. Everything I do is for him. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." Victoria walked to the window that overlooked the city, her mind racing through possibilities she'd never considered before. She'd built Sterling Industries to be impermeable, efficient, utterly focused on profit and progress. There was no room in her corporate structure for single fathers with traumatized children, no protocol for transforming laboratories into sanctuaries. But Marcus wasn't just an employee anymore. He was family, the only family she had left. "Tell me about the night terrors," she said. "What triggers them?" Marcus hesitated, clearly unsure why she was asking. "Loud noises mostly. Construction, sirens, anything that sounds like the accident." "What accident?" "A building collapse near our old apartment. David was at the playground across the street when it happened. Saw the whole thing. 3 people died, including a child about his age." Marcus's voice became clinical, like he was reading from a medical report. He wasn't physically hurt, but the psychological impact, he stopped talking for 2 months afterward. Victoria turned to face him. "And your father's lullaby brings him out of the flashbacks." "Every time. I don't understand it, but that song is like a lifeline for him. It pulls him back from wherever the nightmares take him." Victoria made a decision that would have terrified her 24 hours ago. "I want to meet him." "What?" "David. I want to meet my cousin's son." The words felt strange in her mouth, weighted with a possibility she'd never imagined. "Would you bring him to my office tomorrow, after daycare?" Marcus stared at her like she'd suggested jumping off the building. "Ms. Sterling, I don't think—" "Victoria," she corrected. "We're family, Marcus. I think we can dispense with the formalities." "Victoria." He tested the name carefully, like he was afraid it might break. "Why? Why do you want to meet him?" The honest answer was too complicated to put into words. Because she'd spent 23 years believing she was alone in the world. Because hearing that lullaby had cracked open a longing she'd thought she'd successfully buried. Because the idea of family, real family, not the collection of business associates and employees who comprised her world, felt like discovering a new continent. Instead, she said, "Because he's the only nephew I'm ever going to have." Marcus's eyes filled with tears he clearly wasn't expecting. He's not an easy child. The trauma makes him skittish around strangers. And he doesn't talk much, even now. "I'm not going anywhere," Victoria said, and realized she meant it. "We have time." That evening, Victoria did something she hadn't done in decades. She called in sick. Not to her assistant, not to her board of directors, but to herself. She canceled 3 meetings, postponed a conference call with investors in Tokyo, and left the office before sunset for the first time in recent memory. Instead of going to her penthouse apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, she drove to the Queen Anne neighborhood where Marcus lived with his son. She didn't plan to intrude, just wanted to see where her family lived, to understand the world they'd built without her. The apartment complex was modest but well-maintained, surrounded by trees that would be beautiful when spring arrived. Victoria parked across the street and watched families come and go, parents carrying grocery bags, children riding bikes in the courtyard, the easy intimacy of people who'd chosen to build lives together. Through a third-floor window, she caught a glimpse of warm light and movement. A man's silhouette, tall and familiar, moving around what must be a kitchen. Then, a smaller figure, a child jumping up and down with excitement about something. Victoria sat in her Tesla and watched Marcus make dinner for his son, watched them eat together at a small table by the window, watched the easy rhythm of their evening routine. When darkness finally fell and the apartment lights went out, she drove home with a strange ache in her chest that she couldn't quite name. The next day, dragged with an anticipation Victoria hadn't felt since childhood Christmas mornings. She rescheduled her afternoon meetings and had Helen stock her office with things a 4-year-old might enjoy: juice boxes, crackers, picture books she'd ordered online in a panic of uncertainty. At 4:30, her intercom buzzed. "Mr. Chen and his son are here," Helen announced. Victoria's hands were shaking as she opened her office door. Marcus stood in the reception area wearing dark jeans and a sweater instead of his work coveralls, looking nervous but determined. Beside him, partially hidden behind his father's legs, was the child she'd glimpsed in the laboratory. David Chen was small for 4, with his father's dark hair and enormous brown eyes that seemed to take in everything while giving nothing away. He wore a striped shirt and tiny sneakers, and he clutched a worn stuffed elephant against his chest like a shield. "David," Marcus said gently, "this is Victoria. She's Daddy's. She's our family." The boy peered at Victoria with solemn curiosity, clearly trying to decide if she could be trusted. She knelt down to his eye level, remembering how her father had always made himself small when talking to her as a child. "Hello, David," she said softly. "I like your elephant. What's his name?" David whispered something to his stuffed animal, then looked at his father for permission to speak. "You can tell her," Marcus encouraged. "It's okay." "Trumpy," David said, his voice barely audible. "He's not scared of loud noises." Victoria felt her heart crack open a little more. "He must be very brave." "He is. Daddy says brave means scared, but doing it anyway." "Your daddy's right. And you know what? I have some juice boxes in my office and some books about elephants. Would you like to see?" David nodded shyly and allowed Victoria to lead him into her office, Trumpy held protectively against his chest. For the next hour, she watched her nephew slowly relax as they read stories and built towers out of foam blocks she'd panic-ordered that morning. When David fell asleep in the corner of her office couch, Victoria and Marcus sat watching him in comfortable silence. "He likes you," Marcus said quietly. "That's unusual. He doesn't warm up to people easily." "He feels safe here," Victoria realized, "in this office." "Why?" Marcus smiled, the first completely unguarded expression she'd seen from him. "It's quiet. No unexpected noises. And you move slowly, talk softly. You're not trying to force him to be different than he is." Victoria looked around her office, the space she'd designed to intimidate and impress, all sharp angles and imposing furniture. But somehow, with David curled up on her couch and Marcus sitting across from her like they'd done this 1,000 times before, it felt less like a corporate fortress and more like what she'd never thought she needed, a place where family could find each other. "Marcus," she said, "I want to help, not as your boss, but as David's aunt. Whatever you need. Better childcare, medical specialists, a different apartment if the current one has too many triggers. I want to help." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Why? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything." Victoria thought about the lullaby that had cracked open her world, about 23 years of believing she was alone, about the father she'd lost too young and the sister he'd mourned in silence. "Because my father spent his last months wondering if he'd ever see his sister again," she said, "and maybe I can't bring them back, but I can make sure their children don't lose each other too." Marcus reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, the first genuine human contact Victoria had allowed in years. "Family," he said, like he was testing the word. "Family," Victoria agreed. And for the first time since she was 12 years old, Victoria Sterling believed she might actually know what that meant. 3 weeks after Victoria Sterling discovered she had family, the carefully constructed peace they'd built together shattered like glass against concrete. It started with a phone call at 2 in the morning, the kind that always brought devastating news. Victoria jerked awake in her penthouse bedroom, her heart hammering as she reached for the secure line that only a handful of people knew about. "Victoria, it's Marcus." His voice was raw, desperate. "I'm at Children's Hospital. David, something's wrong, really wrong." Victoria was out of bed and pulling on clothes before he finished speaking. "What happened?" "He had another night terror, but this time he didn't come out of it. He's been screaming for 3 hours, completely unresponsive. The doctors, they say they've never seen anything like it. I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, Victoria burst through the pediatric emergency room doors at Seattle Children's Hospital, still wearing yesterday's clothes and her hair in disarray. She'd never been in a children's hospital before. The bright murals and cheerful colors felt obscene against the backdrop of genuine terror in a small boy's cries that echoed from somewhere deep in the ward. She found Marcus in a consultation room, his face gray with exhaustion and fear. Dr. Rachel Morrison, a pediatric psychiatrist with kind eyes and prematurely silver hair, was explaining something about trauma responses and dissociative episodes, but Victoria could see that Marcus had stopped processing words hours ago. "Where is he?" Victoria asked. "Room 314, Dr. Morrison said. But I should warn you, he's in a severe psychological crisis. The nursing staff has had to restrain him to prevent self-injury, and he's been completely nonverbal since the episode began." Victoria looked at Marcus. "The lullaby." "Doesn't work." Marcus's voice broke. "I've been singing it for hours. He can't hear me anymore." They walked to David's room in silence. Through the observation window, Victoria saw her 4-year-old nephew strapped to a hospital bed, his small body rigid with terror, his eyes open, but seeing nothing of the present moment. 2 nurses flanked him, their faces etched with the kind of professional compassion that came from witnessing too much childhood trauma. "He's lost in the flashback," Dr. Morrison explained quietly. "His mind has essentially shut down to protect itself from the overwhelming fear. In some cases like this, children can remain in this state for days or even weeks." "No." Victoria's voice was steel. "That's not happening. What do you need? Different medications? Better specialists? I don't care what it costs." Dr. Morrison studied Victoria with the careful attention of someone accustomed to desperate family members making impossible demands. "Miss Sterling, I understand your distress, but this isn't something money can fix. David's trauma runs deeper than we initially realized. The building collapse he witnessed. We're discovering there may have been additional factors we weren't aware of." "What kind of factors?" Marcus sank into a chair like his legs could no longer support him. "Tell her, Dr. Morrison. Tell her what you found." The doctor consulted her tablet. "When we took David's full medical history tonight, we discovered that his mother died in that building collapse, not in a car accident as we originally understood. David witnessed his mother's death, along with the other casualties." Victoria felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "His mother?" "Lisa Park," Marcus whispered. "David's mom. We weren't married, but she was everything to us. She died trying to help evacuate children from the daycare center that was in the building's ground floor. David saw her go in. He never saw her come out." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. David wasn't just traumatized by witnessing a random tragedy. He was reliving the moment he watched his mother die, trying to save other children. And Marcus had been carrying that unbearable weight alone, protecting his son from the truth while trying to hold together their fractured world. "Why didn't you tell me?" Victoria asked. Marcus looked up at her with eyes that held 2 years of accumulated grief. "Because David doesn't remember. The trauma blocked it out completely. His conscious mind thinks his mother died in a car accident. That's what I told him, because the truth would destroy what's left of his childhood. But somewhere deep down, he knows. and every night terror brings him closer to remembering. Dr. Morrison cleared her throat gently. There's something else you should know. The building that collapsed was owned by Sterling Industries. It was one of your older properties, scheduled for demolition and replacement with a luxury residential complex. The daycare center was supposed to have moved out 6 months earlier, but there was a legal dispute over their lease terms. Victoria's world tilted on its axis. What? The structural engineering reports had identified potential issues with the building's foundation, but the demolition was delayed because of the lease dispute. Sterling Industries' legal team was fighting to evict the remaining tenants, including the daycare center. The room was silent except for the sound of David's labored breathing from the next room. Victoria stared at Dr. Morrison, processing the impossible weight of what she'd just learned. Her nephew's mother had died in a building owned by Victoria's company. David's trauma, Marcus's desperate situation, their entire fractured world, all of it traced back to decisions made in Sterling Industries boardrooms, documented in legal files Victoria had never bothered to review personally. "Show me the records," Victoria said, her voice hollow. Dr. Morrison hesitated. "Miss Sterling, I don't think now is the time." "Show me the goddamn records." 20 minutes later, Victoria sat in the hospital's family consultation room with her laptop open, scrolling through legal documents and engineering reports that painted a picture of corporate negligence so clear it made her sick. The daycare center, Little Sprouts Early Learning, had been fighting eviction for 8 months. Sterling Industries' legal team had used every possible delay tactic to force them out, knowing the building was structurally unsound, but unwilling to break the lease early, because it would set a costly precedent for their other properties. Lisa Park had been the daycare center's assistant director. She died trying to evacuate 19 children when the building's south wall collapsed during a minor earthquake. 17 children had survived because of her actions. 2 had died with her. Victoria found Lisa's photograph in the incident report, a young woman with David's dark eyes and Marcus's gentle smile, wearing a yellow sundress and holding a toddler who looked exactly like David at 2 years old. "She was beautiful," Victoria whispered. Marcus had been reading over her shoulder. "She was the best person I ever knew. Kind to everyone, patient with difficult children, always seeing the potential in people instead of their problems. She would have loved you, Victoria. Would have been so happy that David had an aunt who cared about him." "This is my fault." Victoria's voice was barely audible. "My company killed her. I killed her." "You didn't know. That's exactly the problem." Victoria slammed the laptop shut. "I didn't know because I didn't care. I built this empire by treating people like numbers on spreadsheets, by letting lawyers handle the details while I focused on profits and acquisitions. Lisa Park was a detail. Those children were details. David's trauma was an acceptable loss as long as Sterling Industries hit its quarterly targets." In the next room, David's cries had finally quieted to whimpers. Victoria stood and walked to the observation window, watching her nephew's small body gradually relax as exhaustion overcame terror. "He's going to remember," Dr. Morrison said softly, joining Victoria at the window. "Maybe not today, maybe not next month, but someday his mind will be ready to process what really happened. And when that day comes, he's going to need people who can help him carry that truth." Victoria thought about the lullaby that had brought them together, her father's song, passed down through generations of Sterling family members who had loved their children enough to sing away their nightmares. But what kind of lullaby could heal the knowledge that your mother died because of corporate greed? What melody was powerful enough to transform that kind of darkness into something a child could live with? "I need to make a phone call," Victoria said. She walked to the hospital's chapel, not because she was religious, but because it was the only place quiet enough for the conversation she needed to have. Her fingers trembled as she dialed James Morrison, her head of security, and the man who'd handled the legal fallout from the building collapse 2 years ago. "Miss Sterling, it's 3 in the morning. Is there an emergency? James, I need you to find every document related to the Little Sprouts Daycare Center incident. Every legal brief, every settlement agreement, every piece of correspondence between our legal team and the victims' families." "Ma'am, those files are sealed under the settlement agreements. Our legal team specifically advised against—" "I don't care what our legal team advised. I want everything on my desk by noon today." Ms. Sterling, may I ask why you're revisiting this matter? The settlement was finalized 18 months ago. Reopening those files could expose the company to additional liability. Victoria closed her eyes and saw David's terrified face, saw Lisa Park's photograph, saw Marcus carrying the weight of grief and responsibility that should have been shared with family who cared about him. Because I just found out that one of the victims was my family, James. And I'm done prioritizing Sterling Industries' liability over doing what's right. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Victoria wondered if the call had dropped. James? I'm here. Ms. Sterling, if you're planning what I think you're planning, it could cost the company hundreds of millions in additional settlements. The board will never approve. Then I'll resign from the board. You can't resign. You're the controlling shareholder. And even if you could, this decision affects more than just you. We have employees, investors, contractual obligations. Victoria thought about Marcus working night shifts as a janitor, because his engineering career had been derailed by circumstances beyond his control. Thought about David suffering night terrors because his mother had died trying to save children in a building that never should have been occupied. Thought about all the other families who had been quietly paid to disappear while Sterling Industries continued operating as if their losses were simply the cost of doing business. Find me those files, James, and while you're at it, I want a complete audit of all our commercial properties, any building with outstanding safety concerns, any tenant dispute involving vulnerable populations, any situation where we're prioritizing profits over people's lives. I want to know about all of it. Ms. Sterling, I strongly advise against. Your advice is noted and rejected. You have until noon. Victoria ended the call and sat in the chapel's front pew, staring at a stained glass window that cast colored light across the empty altar. She'd built her entire identity around being stronger than her emotions, smarter than her competition, more ruthless than anyone who dared challenge her authority. But strength without compassion wasn't strength at all. It was just sophisticated cruelty dressed in expensive suits and justified by quarterly earnings reports. When she returned to David's room an hour later, she found Marcus asleep in the chair beside his son's bed, his hand resting protectively on the boy's arm. David was finally sleeping peacefully, his breathing steady and natural for the first time in hours. Dr. Morrison appeared beside Victoria. The crisis has passed for now, but Ms. Sterling, I need you to understand something. David is going to need years of intensive therapy to process his trauma. And even then, there are no guarantees. Some wounds go so deep that they never fully heal. They just become part of who we are. Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. However, Dr. Morrison continued, having family who understand his pain, who are committed to supporting him through the difficult times ahead, that makes all the difference. Love can't erase trauma, but it can make it bearable. Dr. Morrison, Victoria said quietly, what would it take to establish a trauma recovery center here at the hospital? Something specifically designed for children who've experienced this kind of loss? The doctor's eyebrows rose. That would be substantial. We're talking about specialized staff, dedicated facilities, probably $5 to $10 million in initial funding, plus ongoing operational costs. Consider it done. I'll have my foundation transfer the funds next week. Ms. Sterling, that's incredibly generous, but it's not generous. It's overdue. Victoria walked to David's bedside and gently touched his small hand. In sleep, he looked so much younger than 4, a baby, really, who'd already seen too much of the world's capacity for destruction. But he was also Marcus's son, Lisa Park's boy, the product of 2 people who'd chosen love over fear, even in the face of impossible circumstances. I'm going to make this right, she whispered to the sleeping child. I can't bring your mother back, but I can make sure no other child loses someone they love, because my company was too greedy to do the right thing. David's fingers twitched in his sleep, and Victoria chose to believe he'd heard her. As dawn broke over Seattle, Victoria Sterling began the process of dismantling the empire she'd spent 15 years building. Not the company itself, but the ruthless philosophy that had guided every decision, the belief that profit justified any cost, the assumption that other people's pain was simply the price of her success. By noon, Her desk was covered with legal documents that painted a damning picture of corporate negligence spanning decades. Building safety violations ignored to save money, tenant disputes resolved through intimidation rather than negotiation, environmental impact studies buried when they threatened profitable developments. Victoria read every page, signed settlement checks that totaled more than most small countries' annual budgets, and began the long work of transforming Sterling Industries from a company that happened to do good things into a company whose primary purpose was doing good things profitably. It would take years. It would cost billions. The board would fight her every step of the way. Investors would flee. Competitors would circle like vultures, waiting for Sterling Industries to collapse under the weight of its newfound conscience. But that evening, when Victoria arrived at Marcus's apartment for dinner, their first family meal together, she saw David smile for the first time since she'd known him. A small, tentative expression that transformed his entire face and reminded her so strongly of her father that her breath caught in her throat. "Aunt Victoria," David said shyly, testing the title they'd agreed on. "Daddy says you're going to help make buildings safer so other kids don't get scared." Victoria knelt down to his eye level, remembering how her father had always made himself small when talking to her as a child. "That's right, sweetheart. And you know what else? I'm going to make sure you and Daddy never have to worry about having a safe place to live or good doctors when you need them or anything else that families are supposed to take care of together." David considered this seriously, then nodded. "Because you're our family now." "Because I'm your family now," Victoria agreed, "and families take care of each other." That night, Marcus taught Victoria how to sing their father's lullaby properly, the subtle rhythms and pauses that made it more than just a melody, that transformed it into a bridge between the world of waking fears and the sanctuary of peaceful sleep. As Victoria sang along, her voice blending with Marcus's in harmonies their fathers might have sung together decades earlier, she realized that some promises were worth more than money. Some connections ran deeper than blood. And sometimes the most broken people could create the most beautiful families if they were brave enough to choose love over the safety of staying alone. When David finally fell asleep that night, it was peacefully, without terrors, cradled in the certainty that he was surrounded by people who would fight dragons for him if necessary. And for the first time since she was 12 years old, Victoria Sterling fell asleep, believing that tomorrow really would be a new day. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.